I don't like calling it the Arab Spring, although it's difficult because it's such a useful term because everyone knows what it means. My hesitancy is that the term is historically from Western populist movements that happened in Europe in the 19th century and have a very particular history and context, which doesn't quite represent what was going on in the Arab world in 2011.
Welcome to the Afikra podcast. My name is Mikey Mhenna. Today on this series, we have Laila Shereen Sakr, who is also known as VJ Amel, who is the author of the book Arabic Glitch, Technoculture, Data Bodies, and Archives. Laila, welcome to Afikra.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, I was just talking to somebody beforehand, and they're like, oh, who is going to be on the series? And I said, a ultra nerd, which I absolutely love as somebody who is who thinks of themselves as a nerd. I wanted to ask you, what kind of kid were you like? Because I feel like the type of kid you were has informed the type of professional you are.
Interesting. I play a lot. I still love to play.
Yeah.
Very adventurous. I was on my bike or on a big wheel or something like that doing what my mother thought was dangerous things, like going down the stairs. I grew up between Egypt and the US. So a lot of, so I was always that person between cultures. I played a lot of playing, sports, had a radio transistor when I was little, music, sports, poetry. I did a lot of that.
Very cool. Because, like if somebody goes to read your full bio, there are words like software, data, art, media, and all these things seem to sort of intersect seamlessly. But if you were to describe the sort of core question that you are interested in understanding, and your work is sort of trying to interrogate from all these different perspectives, how would you sort of describe what you're trying to get at?
Well, it's a good question. It's a big one. Like I said, I think it's about talking across cultures, and there are many cultures, right? So there's cultures like Egypt, US, that's obvious, but there are also subcultures. There are a variety of differences, even within any country, within any location. There are differences between socioeconomic differences, racial differences, gender differences, age differences, occupation differences. And I find it all very exciting. Yet I really try hard to communicate across difference. And technology has always enabled us to do that. And that's why I'm obsessed with technology. Like I said, when I was 5, I had a little transistor radio that looked like a fly. And then, we had a computer when I was really young. So it's about communicating across differences. And I think that's extremely hard. And I think today more than ever, it's important to do.
Yeah.
So that's what I try to do.
Very, very cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to try to talk about some of the major things that I understood. I knew you worked on before you and I met. Okay.
Okay. Cool.
And then I want to try to understand what you thought you were doing, and then what were you actually doing? Now with some
big question.
Okay, so let's just talk about R-Shief. I think that's a really good place to start because that's the first thing that I knew you did. So if you were to sort of tell the story of what R-Shief is, and what it sort of became, why you started it and what it sort of became, because I think there's an interesting story there.
Yeah, totally. And in fact, it's very historical. So I started with the idea of building R-Shief in 2005, 2006. If you recall, at the time, Facebook had just launched, Twitter had just launched. And so social media just really wasn't even there yet. And I had noticed a lot in blogs, forums, Fatakat, which is an Egyptian forum for Egyptian women, was the largest forum on the internet. The Arabic blogs in the Arabic language, were perhaps the most prevalent on the internet at the time. And I was
Laila,
working as.
Let me make sure I understand what you're saying. You were saying that this blog that you just mentioned, this Egyptian blog, Fatakat was the largest blog of any blog in any language anywhere in the world.
It wasn't a blog, it was a forum.
This was the largest of any one of its kind in any language, any place in the world.
In 2005, 2006. Right? And it was Egyptian women sharing things like recipes and, the things
That's crazy. I had no idea.
And I was surprised too. And in fact, it wasn't when I was, I totally geek out. There's a bunch of Arab techies who consider themselves geeks. And I was part of the Arab techie group because we were trying to build infrastructure and web infrastructure for Arabic speakers in the Arabic language. And if you recall, when the internet first came out, it was in English, and it was very hard to get even the alif, b, t to connect. You couldn't get the letters to connect. And in Arabic, if the letters don't connect, it doesn't make sense. It's not a word. So we were doing some very basic stuff. And I went to I was actually in Lebanon for a conference in 2008 when I realized everyone was using something called Twitter. And in the US, people had not used Twitter yet. And I think it's partly because there are other infrastructure that was well in place in the United States where there wasn't that infrastructure else in the Arab world. So they quickly adopted these new technologies as soon as they came out. So I was working at the time at Georgetown University Center for Contemporary Arab Studies. I was the multimedia and publications editor, and I had my eye on what was coming out on the Arab world. And I was struck by the quantity of material coming out on the internet. And that was considered pop culture at the time and not taken seriously by experts who I respected and worked with. And I thought, oh my goodness, you need to take a look at all of this coming out online. So R-Shief's, so I went to build R-Shief, which was, my intention was to archive the internet in Arabic. A rather large idea, but at the time the internet wasn't so big and it was new and we didn't know what it was. And it was this was pre-social media, right? This is internet 1.0, not even 2.0.
Yeah.
Not when we were curating media. This is when we were just building.
So GeoCities sites and stuff like that.
Right. AOL, Yahoo. Yeah. And it was blogs at the time. I had 20 blogs. And after 2008, when I went to this conference in Junya, and I was like, what I'm going to do is I'll archive our let's use the hashtag. I learned about what a hashtag was at the time. Let's use the hashtag ATWomen, and I'm going to archive everything from, that we tweet on this hashtag, and I'll archive it, and then that will be our notes. So I went back to the States. I waited a few weeks, and the tweets were gone. And I was like, oh my goodness, not only is this internet really quickly, you can quickly publish and quickly disseminate, yet it quickly disappears. And so I went on a rampage to start actually archiving Twitter and can you hold on a second? I just have to turn off I have to hang up okay, I got to turn off my emails coming in, and it's confusing me. So I was saying, let's go back. I was saying, so I started archiving the internet. So I started archiving Twitter specifically by hashtag in 2010, by the time I actually was able to launch the application. And I started by archiving tweets that had the hashtag Gaza,
Yeah.
and Slotilla. Those were my first hashtags. So by the time 2011 came around, I had this system of archiving blogs, Facebook pages, which was the hardest actually, and Twitter, and yeah.
So
that's how it started.
You basically like had some scraper that was just scraping HTML and putting in some big database, and you had some like huge structured database that said like this tweet, this date, this text, right?
Exactly. And the database was so primitive, and it couldn't handle a lot of quantity. I mean, I built it.
Sure.
I built it simple, and I'm not a trained computer scientist. My undergraduate degree is in English literature. I had a master's degree in Arab studies, and then I went and did an MSA in digital arts and new media. And so I'm in the arts and humanities, and then a PhD eventually. So for me to do that was exciting and a challenge and really fun. What happened then after that was that it became really a critical tool. Nobody else was doing that. Then we had the Arab Spring. I don't like calling it the Arab Spring, although it's difficult because it's such a useful location. It's a useful term because everyone knows what it means. However, my hesitancy is that the term is historically from Western populist movements that happened in Europe in the 19th century and have a very particular history and context, which doesn't quite represent what was going on in the Arab world in 2011. And it's a misnomer. It was used by American Western scholars to describe the moment. And there is something about the populist uprising, and there have been since then, there have consequently been many populist uprisings. And it's not like, the spring towards a very exciting capitalist moment. So then when that happened, honestly, the technology, R-Shief's technology sprang forward. And I had to, the database, as you can imagine, broke. And it broke. There was a lot of glitches, a lot of problems. I quickly moved from a basic shared server VPN to a dedicated server, and eventually to the cloud. And that was the way I was able to continue and doing all the analytics. It needed processing power. It needed really smart storage. And how do you actually store and retrieve data in a database that can actually become offerable, that you can actually use. And then, so that was 2011, a lot of growth. R-Shief saw a lot of growth in 2011. And eventually by the end of 2011, what I had begun doing was machine learning. I figured out, which is, machine learning and AI have been around for a while. It's only now that we've got ChatGPT and OpenAI, but the actual ideas have been around. And basically, I figured out a way to discern the language of a tweet, which at the time were only 120 characters. Now they're 240. But you could discern what language was the tweet by looking at character by character and figuring out what language it was. At the time, Twitter didn't have that in their API. You only had the box that the user checked, which was the user's preferred language. And for many of us, we're multilingual, and that doesn't really help. And we write, as online and Twitter, we write in Arabic, English, Franglais. We put in Arabic for writing in English. Sometimes we put in numbers to represent letters that don't exist in English. And there's a lot of Amaya kaman, different dialects. So I had to figure out a way to figure that out. And that was a machine learning process.
Okay. So I was reading online and I read a sentence that struck me, and I want you to tell me this story and tell me if it's even right. And the sentence goes, Laila Shereen Sakr used data to predict the downfall of Gaddafi.
Yeah. That's what people, what I've become known for. So when you have large quantities of data, you're able to do really amazing predictive analysis. In fact, that is what we're seeing today. That is what that is the basic logic behind ChatGPT. Okay. All right. Let me just quickly give a quick background history of the software. I just have to put this in this frame. We have Web 1.0 when we were actually building in HTML. We didn't have what we called WYSIWYGs. It was only the web designer was able to put content online. Okay. That was Web 0.0, let's say 1990, late 90s to 2005. After that, we had something called Web 2.0, which is when we saw the emergence of social media, where you as a user, you don't have to have any technical skills. You can go in there and change the content, right? You know what that is. Go in the back end and upload whatever content you want. That's Web 2.0, and that enabled social media. That's when we as humans, have been curating a lot of content. We curated so much content under Web 2.0 because we enabled everybody to publish. Web 3.0, let's leave meta aside for a minute. But what we're seeing now is, you can call it the next generation, Web 3.0, 4.0. We're seeing now that the technology itself is generating content. How does the technology generate content? It trains itself. It teaches itself based on old data. We couldn't have ChatGPT and AI working if we didn't have 10 years of social media. We needed the 10 years of Web 2.0 to produce all the content that we produced. Now the new models can train against large corpuses of data and are able to predict. And in many ways, that is what it's doing. And I don't know if you've heard people talk about how ChatGPT hallucinates, because what it's not hallucinate, it makes up false stuff because it's trying to predict. It's using a basic logic to say, okay, well, what then? What's next? So what I had done is a really, really basic thing. Again, by 2011, August 2011, that had been like 3 years in, I had a large corpus of data. R-Shief had been archiving nonstop for a few years. And what I was able to do, I went in, what happened was, it was part automated and part just who I knew and where I was at the time. I had just been at the U.S. State Department to give a talk about R-Shief and the machine learning language recognition tool that I had built. And literally in July, and Gaddafi fell in August.
July of 2011.
July of 2011. And I had a large mailing list of people I was in communication with. So when on a Saturday, I got a text from a friend in Egypt saying, "What's going on? Zawiya, the rebels have overtaken Zawiya. Can you please go look at your tweets and tell us what you find?" And so I went in there, and it was really basic math. I was able to do an analysis, what we call analytics. This is kind of what I do, close analysis of the internet. Like we do close textual analysis of a literature, of a book. I'm doing close analysis of social media. So I look and I see a pattern, like a pattern of what's going on in Zawiya. And then I matched it with Tripoli, Libya, not Tripoli, Lebanon, and saw the same pattern, the exact same pattern, right? And these are rebels. We know who these rebels are. We know what's going on somewhat. And I saw the exact same pattern. So I just did basic math. Okay, so at this point it fell. So if I just use this pattern on this model, and I predicted, I said, okay, he's got 18 to 36 hours. I was off by 6 hours. And what happened was, go ahead.
No. Finish the thought. So you're off by 6 hours. Finish the thought, and then I was off.
So the thing is, I'm doing these analyses on the fly, right? Like at the time, it wasn't automated analysis on R-Shief's portal. I had to do them, and then I would upload like a static image, like you see there. Yeah. So what I did was I tweeted, I used text message at the time to like 800 people who were on R-Shief's listserv, but I used a SMS. And I said, what I said, something like 18 to 36 hours, according to R-Shief's calculations. And I threw a graph in there. And that went back to the State Department, went back to Clinton's office. I went back to the, Clinton's office, and I believe Barack Obama's office at the time. And I heard back from them a few weeks later that I don't know if that was an alert or whatever, but I was close. The analysis was close.
Okay, so the graph, the thing that you're graphing, the y-axis is the quantity, and the quantity, the x-axis is the date, right? And the y-axis is like the number of tweets, essentially.
Well, it's more than that. Yeah, it's not just quantity; it's quantity over time by the minute.
Yeah.
So that it really break it down, and then sentiment and words. So I would do what's called sentiment analysis, which is somewhat problematic. To do proper sentiment analysis, like any of these analyses, you need a large quantity of data. When you have small amounts of data, your percentage of error is greater. So with 120 characters, it's very hard to discern the sentiment, especially with human beings being sarcastic and using, we don't talk straight. We're not straightforward.
Yeah.
So, so it's a combination of sentiment analysis, trying to figure out and figure out which partisan analysis. So who's tweeting from what party, what political vantage point. That was really critical. So I could do a comparison of the different political perspectives and sentiment over time, by the minute, and frequency. Does that make sense? So all of that
totally
together.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Right.
I just realized in Arabic you can't tweet in all caps, so that also changes the sentiment.
Yeah, there's all kinds of things. I didn't think about that. I haven't thought about that. That's really interesting. Yeah, no, all caps, but there's a lot of emojis, and the Arabic language. My first love is the Arab. My love is poetry and language.
Yeah.
I'm in love with the Arabic language, even though English is really my strength, is my primary language.
Yeah.
But Arabic is powerful and poetic, and there's so much nuance, just like any language.
Sure. Okay, I want to switch gears a little bit and ask you, who is VJ Amel? Who is this character?
So, the things, all of these bits that make up the book didn't really happen in the chronology, the chronology is interesting. So I first decided I got to go back to school because I need to archive the internet in Arabic, and off to an MFA program and then to a PhD program to do that. When that happened, it was 2007. Before that, I was an activist in DC. Like I said, I was working at Georgetown. 9/11 had happened. I was publishing poetry. I was very on the streets. I was out and about and very active. Just like the little 5-year-old on the bike.
Yeah.
But what happened in 2007 is I became a mother. And that changes your life. I also moved to California. I was in DC, and I started an MFA program. And part of what I was doing, I needed to transform my creative expression in some way. And I was geeking out big time on technology. And at the time I had already been I had been organizing a lot of parties and raves and that kind of artistic scene in DC. So I had moved towards, I love music, but I'm not a musician. So I do what's called VJing, which is live visuals that accompany musicians, usually live music and live and visuals. And so that was kind of what I wanted to do in my MFA program. And so really it was a need to transform my creative self from DC to California, from being single to being a mother and having a partner. And so was born Amel, who is now 15. And
Amazing.
I became Amel. And also because, I just think that we we, especially in the United States, we really undervalue the mother figure a lot. I started thinking very existentially about, like, here's my work and all of these, all this technology. What does it mean for technology to reproduce? What does it mean to be a mother in an age of so much media? So I really was asking myself these questions, and I wanted to perform them as I like to do. And so it was through the MFA program that I conceptualized and really became VJ Amel. And I performed VJ Amel on my social media platforms. I almost all of them, I call myself VJ Amel online. I didn't use my real name until most recently, because the book is coming out in my real name. That's the only reason why I changed my Facebook page to Laila. But for 15 years, I've been VJ Amel, to the point where people don't even know that VJ Amel is me. And I liked that. And it will go back to the multiplicity of identities that I like to play with. But this is one where I really felt the need for a long time to think through, what does it mean to be an Arabic-speaking cyborg who's a mother? Like, there was something very revolutionary and powerful for me to think about that. Also because I told you I was archiving Twitter in 2010. One of the most prominent people on Twitter at the time was Gaza, handle Gaza Mom, which is, her name is Laila also. And again, Fatakat, right? So there were these, like, mothers, Arabic-speaking mothers, that were very active online. You can have a baby and work and have your child over there and still do what you need to do online. I think, I don't know. So yeah, all of that together.
Yeah, very brilliant. Yeah.
I continue to work on VJ Amel. VJ Amel is my alter ego. It's been 15 years. I want to continue developing the concept.
It sounds like Laila is your alter ego.
Yeah, maybe. Also developing that concept as well.
Yeah, that concept is also in progress and development. When we spoke earlier, we were talking about the book, and you said something really captivating. This was like maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. And you basically said something along the lines of, the Arab world is predicting sort of the future when it comes to sort of internet culture and technoculture, as you mentioned. And as you said it, I felt like I understood 1% of what you meant, but I was captivated, and I was like, what the hell is she talking about? Tell me more. So before you try to tell me more, am I even misunderstanding that 1%?
Well, I don't know what the 1% is that you understood.
Like, even me speaking it back to you now, did I even get the gist of what you were trying to say?
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, explain it to me.
I mean, maybe it comes back again. It goes back to the fact that I've been thinking about communication across differences and across cultures for my entire life. So there was a period before, there was a period in the late 90s when I was working in telecommunications, and so if you think about telecommunications before mobile technology, we had landlines, and there were copper wires that went into the systems in the cities. The United States had great fiber optics and lines taking house to house. It wasn't the case in most of the Middle East. When mobile technologies came about quickly, places like Doha, Qatar, the Emirates, they just skyrocketed. They might not have had the old infrastructure, but they didn't need it anymore. And they had those finances to build the new infrastructure for mobile technology. so quickly it changed the landscape. Doha is one of the most obvious. I remember their telephony. There's like a percentage of how many landlines and how many mobile lines per citizen, for the over the population, and I remember that was high at the time. This is a long time ago. So there was that, and you compare it to other parts of the world, and you notice that more developed Western cultures, it was harder for them, and to undo and to make a change was a little bit harder. But it's easier when you have nothing.
Yeah.
When there's a lack of infrastructure, it's easier to build new. It's kind of like it's easier to build when you don't know. It's harder to unlearn and change, make a shift. So that's one thing. So I think that has a lot to do with it, and I think also there was this nebulous period when the internet was not thought of as dangerous, and not the states didn't need to. There was not a need for state surveillance. Like I said, it was considered like pop culture for the kids and not something to take seriously, right?
Harmless.
And so
like how people think.
It was.
No, sorry. Go ahead.
How people think
what people think about TikTok. I mean, that's changing increasingly.
Right.
They're harmless in the same way.
It's harmless, and it's just what kids do. It's kids stuff. Yeah. And so there was a window in which there was a lot more freedom of expression. This is also because there is not the same level of freedom to speak your mind across the Middle Eastern countries. I think it depends on country to country, of course, but there are laws in place that prevent people from speaking their mind simply.
Yeah.
And so these new places were like heaven. And so lots of Arabs, there was just a huge surge of adaptation of these technologies. And I'm talking about from the late 90s all the way until 2011. Yeah. Now, I don't know what I would say about the current moment. We were the first. And then if you look around, okay, what did you have? We had Occupy Wall Street. That was the social media or sort of digital activism, as we're calling it. Then we had the Arab Uprisings of 2011. Then we had Hong Kong. We had, I'm drawing a blank. We had Hong Kong. We had,
we had
in Brazil, Lebanon, Brazil, all around the world. And social in Spain, 12M, right? So there were these. So after the Arab uprisings, we saw different parts of the world, activists or populations using social media.
January 6th.
We had January 6th. We had BLM, the Black Lives Movement, which really was a hashtag to begin with, right?
Yeah.
So after the Arab uprisings, we saw a similar pattern of activism or uprisings and people coming together and using internet, social media as a means of coming together and protesting.
So I want to read this one sentence, right? That Arabic Glitch, this book, explores an alternative origin story of the 21st century. The 21st century technological innovation and digital politics, one that's centered in the Middle East and basically started in 2011 with the Arab uprisings. So essentially, are you trying to reframe people's understanding not only of the 21st century from a digital perspective, but even sort of like the 21st century more broadly? Like if we think about how this century started, you're like, it kind of started with these
9/11.
Yeah. Essentially, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I didn't think. You're making. Yeah, I didn't quite go there in my mind, but I guess one could make the argument that So a couple things. One is that usually we think of technology as centered in Silicon Valley. And a lot of the technology that grew from there, their politics were more capitalist driven, venture funding, make money. Mm-hmm. And we can see how you can't buy a property now in Silicon Valley. It's so expensive. right?
Yeah.
Oh, there was also the adaptation. There's also open source technologies that also began in Silicon Valley, but really the open source technology and the way the technologies were built in the Arabic speaking world were very different. That there were also companies, venture capitalist companies, but those are not the ones that really made software programs that we're using. It was really the Arab techies, like sort of on the ground, using open source, using Western open source technologies. That's really what happened. But because they were open source, they were able to build their own stuff. For example, in Drupal. Drupal is, do you know what Drupal is?
Yeah.
It's a platform to build websites. And it's like WordPress, Joomla. These are remnants from Web 2.0.
Yeah.
So they're open source technologies. What that means is if you want to build something to add to what already exists, you can do that. And if you go to Drupal's, I think I mentioned it in the book. There's a whole section for Arab developers, and you can see all of their work and who was the group leader and what did they say and what did they do. It's all there. It's still there. So anyhow, there's also Bassem Safadi, the Syrian, very well-known Syrian, the techie programmer, coder, and activist who was then detained in Syria and subsequently killed in jail. And he was working with Wikipedia and others, and they were trying to get him released for a very long time. So there was, like I said, what I think is interesting is that we're seeing a shift in economics globally. Global capitalism has definitely is saturated, and we're seeing it fall apart in different ways. We're also seeing politics shift. There's a very conservative moment that we're living in today. And I argue that that the Arabic, Arab techies, Arab activists have had, how do I say this?
I think what you're trying to say is that basically these Arab activists were the first ones globally to leverage this technology to advocate for themselves in a system,
right?
In the system that they were sort of embedded in and forced to live in.
Right.
I love the idea that, as you said, this is sort of ground zero for that technology. The Arab world is ground zero for that technology. Not only the Arab world, sort of like many sort of third world economies, because of the technological, the underdeveloped technological landscape.
Right.
So they're going to start using these things to try to quote unquote catch up. I remember I have cousins who grew up in the States, and I remember they used to be like, I would send them HTTP, www websites, and they'd be like, I need to find this on AOL. And I'd be like, what are you talking about? You don't have like Internet Explorer? They're like, no, we only use AOL. And it used to boggle my mind, but it speaks to this dynamic that when you're in this like quote unquote advanced society, you become so desperately a user and not a creator. A producer.
Or a user, or I might even use the word consumer.
Stop. You become a consumer, not a contributor. And when you're not in that society, you kind of have to roll up your sleeves and make do with what's available. But I feel like the book sort of positions these Arab uprisings as being largely successful at starting this global movement, if only as unintentionally creating a playbook for how to advocate for yourself using technology, for better or worse, right?
Exactly.
So do you think of them being largely successful, or you don't think of them in those terms?
Yeah, I try not to think of like in terms of success factors. I mean, success over what period of time? So it is
Yeah.
successful in the sense that, like you said, there's definitely a playbook in play, and others have used it, and I think it's been successful. However, we've seen a turn for the opposite political landscape. We're kind of in a very conservative time, and many of the activists have been quieted in some way, shape, or form. Either they're in jail, or they are not with us anymore, or they're just doing something else and keeping their mouth shut, or being careful about what they say.
Yeah.
So in that way, we can say, "Oh no, it made things worse." But I don't believe that. I think we have such short-term vision. I mean, it's only been 10 years, 12 years. Like, history takes time. These things take generations. We might not see in our lifetime the impact yet. We might not see the impact quite yet. So I don't know. And I don't really try not to look at things in sort of good and bad. It's more complicated than that. Yes, I think we're in a better situation than we were before. We would have been here anyhow. We would have been in 2023 regardless. I'm glad that we did. I'm glad that we went through that period to get to where we are now.
If you were somehow advisor to every parliament, politician, dictator, president across the Arab world, right? Somehow they're like, we love your stuff. How should we deal with the internet? We're entering this very increasingly scary phase. And good can come of it and bad can come of it. There's so much spin on the ball. We have no idea how to do this. How should we regulate it? Should we open it up? Should we close it down? What would your advice be to any of those people?
Education. Teach people. Educate your population. People need educate your population about what I call procedural literacy, understanding basic logic of technology, how code works. How does the algorithm work? It's very algorithms and code, for those who don't use them, are like these fairyland concepts that people think that they do everything when they don't really know. I think we need to educate the entire population about what is digital culture, what is digital logic, so we can understand our culture better. That would be step one. I would mandate it in the schools from K to 12. I would mandate them in the colleges. I would have everybody working in the government understand that. Everyone. It has impacted every aspect of life, every field, every occupation needs to understand, have some literacy. It's basic literacy. I'm not calling for people to become coders. I'm talking about literacy of understanding, that what the AI machine learning system is doing is kind of trying to predict the next thing based on what it's been trained on, like that kind of thing.
Okay. I think I agree with you. Education is
I would start with education.
For sure.
Number one.
Can I just push back on just that? And hopefully that's leading to number two. I feel like the education thing is like, hey, you need to be a responsible consumer, right? And it's more about like responsible consumption. This is the right way of using this thing, right? But I don't know if that deals with the sort of systemic risk associated with this. And maybe there isn't systemic risk, but I'm curious if there is.
Yeah, I think there is, but okay. So without education, you've got an authoritarian regime. Okay. So education's critical, and it's not just for consumers. It's also for producers. So they know what the hell they're producing, and it's for everybody. The education is number one by far. The second thing is to have body, I would, even in this country, we need a regulatory body that, like, in this country, we have the FAA, the Federal Aviation Association or something like that.
Yeah.
I'm sure in different countries, we have different regulatory bodies that are part of the government, and they are there to regulate this thing, make sure that doesn't go off that it doesn't hurt us as a nation, as a nation among nations. And, so a regulatory body that is a really diverse group, not just like your geeky guys in suits, but you want to have maybe some others. Go back to my original point, but honestly, you need a really strong regulatory body and education. I think those are the first two things. It's like shut it down or bring it up. That would be a very authoritarian way forward. And I, when you deny someone something, they're going to find a way to make it happen.
Yeah.
That's just not really in my opinion, that's not necessarily the smartest way forward. The smartest way is to teach and to have regulations that make sense, but you need to have a regulatory body that's constantly doing that work all the time.
Yeah. Okay. R-Shief, a couple more questions about social media across the Arab world today. So that's what it looked like in 2011. What does it look like now? And is it a good, I'm guessing you don't have a tool to scrape Instagram story data, TikTok data, all that stuff. Maybe you do. Who does if you don't? And what is the sort of political sentiment across the region today in 2023?
So there's less politics made people don't speak as much as they used to using social media, so it's not as clear. To answer your first question, R-Shief is at a moment of change again. In 2017, I stopped making the real-time analytics and real-time data available to the public, precisely because we had gone into a very conservative moment and it didn't seem to help anyone. Also, what I was doing was in 2017, you would go in there and ask to look for data on the hashtag, I don't know, Mikey.
Yeah. And
it would just give you a bunch of stuff. So I stopped and I said, all right, I need to pause and regroup. So if you go to R-Shief now, you'll see it's work in progress. I am not ready to launch the new R-Shief, but I'm giving it back. So there's a scraping tool. Basically, you choose Instagram, TikTok. You get to choose which API you want to pull from, and you pull your own data and you make your own data and visualizations using your data. And then we have a way for you to publish data stories. I still have to go back there and upload. I still have to make data stories of the past R-Shief. There's some amazing visualizations that I have. I just haven't uploaded them yet. It's still, like I said, you can see it's under development. I think I even have under development on the website at the moment. So that will be available soon. Like probably when I say soon, I mean 2024. Where you can go in there and you can get your own data, scrape it, and do your own analysis. That's what I've been wanting to do for a very long time. Instead of me doing the analysis, give you the tools, you do the analysis. Again, part of my commitment to procedural literacy and teaching other people how to understand it for themselves. Teach them how to fish. Don't give them the fish, right? Yeah. That's one thing. But when I started this was last year, and since then there are other places, other software platforms who do this. It's not the only service. One's called Media Cloud. There's a lot out there who actually do this kind of service. So it's not like a unique thing anymore. And many of them, they sell their services to universities, and that's how they make a living. Like they make money, and I don't want to sell this product. So honestly, I'm now very interested in looking at OpenAI and looking at the ChatGPT model and doing analytics on the ChatGPT model itself. looking at like the response evaluation, the training data and the biases, input, output, interaction model methods, like what are people inputting and what is it coming out? What's the prompt engineering look like? So I'm more interested to make a shift to what I'm calling Web 3.0, or this new generative moment where the technology is actually generating content as opposed to just curating human content. If that makes any sense.
Makes
so that's
a ton
where
of sense.
I'm in the transition. R-Shief's in transition.
Okay, so I have a question about, so you're like a one-person operation, ostensibly. I'm sure there are lots of other people who you lean on, but generally, you are not a publicly traded company, right? Who has this huge resource. Right. So like, let's take a company like Palantir, for example, right? That's like doing insane predictive analytics, like insanity, right? And they get hired by governments, right? For anyone who's listening, there's a publicly traded company. I think it started by like ex-PayPal guys. And it's kind of scary. Like, it's like Cambridge Analytica, very scary stuff. They undoubtedly get hired by governments inside and outside the Arab world to predict like the sentiment of their populace.
Right. That's what everybody wants. Public opinion. People want to know public opinion.
Yeah. How likely is it that they're not only controlling public opinion, they're not only understanding public opinion, but they are likely controlling public opinion and controlling behavior, not only understanding behavior?
They're the analytics. They are controlling, well, in the sense that their reports, their analysis has an impact on what the government chooses to do. In that sense, then, yeah, people will respond and they're controlled by the reports and what the reports mean and how but the reports are, one thing I've come to learn is that you'll always find what you're looking for, said Edward Tufte, who is a father of data visualization. And if you're looking, there's so much content out there, you will always find what you're looking for. So if they're looking for something, they'll find it. And then they can make the argument, whatever that argument they want to make, they'll be able to make. Not to say that analytics are frou-frou. No, they do have some validity and some claim, but there needs to be a lot more contextualization, contextual research and understanding behind it. That's why they make a lot of errors. You can make one little mistake, one bias, and then it's an egregious error. A great book by a colleague, Sophia Noble, is called Algorithms of Oppression, where she, came out a couple years ago, and he starts by talking about going to Google and doing a search of Black women and then to see something about Black women, something like that. I don't forget what the verb is.
Why are Black women so?
Why are Black women so? And all of these really negative, derogatory terms automatically came out. This proved her point that the internet is biased, that there is a lot of biased data. Who's creating these algorithms? I teach a course on algorithms and culture. We go deep into studying how this comes about. So, these analyses, again, what's your purpose for doing the analysis? If your purpose is to get the big clients to make the money because you want the big accounts, then you're going to give the big accounts what they want.
Yeah.
And I just find that I'm pessimistic about markets, and I find that when you produce for a market, you are inevitably influenced by that market, and it influences what you produce. And that is why I am not publicly traded. That is why I'm in academia. That's why I do what I do, because I want freedom to stay and do what I want. And if I had to be tied to that market, then I wouldn't be able to do that. And there was an opportunity for R-Shief to go that direction, and I didn't want to do that. It was not my choice.
Yeah. Okay, I want to ask you the quick Q&A, and then we're going to wrap up.
Oh, yeah. All right.
So what are you reading or watching these days?
Okay. Well, I'm reading a lot about AI and feminist technologies, AI and archives and blah, 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 but they're kind of boring. A really fun book I'm reading right now is Mackenzie Wark's book, Raving. I have it right here.
Cool.
And I love Mackenzie Wark. She's really amazing writer, theoretician, has published many, many books, based in New York City. And this book is, it blends this academic analysis with a personal narrative experiences. It's about the trans rave scene in New York City and looking at like the cultural, social, artistic dimensions of the rave culture. And I think one of the exciting things that she provides a unique perspective on like techno music and positioning it as Black music, and a form that invites like new possibilities and new experiences. And it's really exciting. The book just touches on appropriation, co-optation, and the commercialization of rave culture. Yeah. It's really, really or subversive. It's original. I just really love the fact that it's both, engaging intellectually, and at the same time, it's this personal narrative. And I'm also part of that whole rave culture, rave scene. So
very cool.
It's a great book. Highly recommend. Great review by New York Times.
Okay. Who would you love to shadow for a day, past or present?
This was a hard question. This is hard. I really don't have heroes or heroines or people like that. I don't do that. I think maybe my mama is my hero, my mother and my father. But so I thought about this. I think I would be curious to go back in time, like a really long some ancient civilization, and just be anybody. I just want to be anybody. But I'd be interested to see what life was like in one of the ancient civilizations, because I'm just curious to see how progressive they might have been. Anywhere in the world, I don't care. Africa, Asia, Latin America, Europe, you pick it. But just like thousands of years ago, what was it like?
Yeah, cool.
I think that's where, be interested. Because I'm curious. I don't think that it's all that different. I think our sense of time is we are so selfish and so self-centered. We live X number of years, or we think that our little human life is like everything. And I think that I don't know that much has changed.
I agree with you. What do people most misunderstand about your work?
Most people come to my work from one angle, and my work really is a bridge. I am the hyphen itself among different subject matters, from computer science, analytics, which is really hardcore computer science or maybe social sciencey, to like Middle East studies, which requires a particular type of learning. Many people in Middle East studies are historians, so they're not very futurist forward thinking or thinking. Also involves media studies, media arts, the arts in the United States, the arts in Europe, the arts in the Middle East, visual culture, and then sort of a feminist landscape for all of it, a feminist approach to all of it. And I think that most people come to my work from one or maybe two angles, and they don't get the importance of having it all together. And that's, I think, what I was hoping to do in the book. That's why the book. I mean, I've done artwork, and I've done, software development. I've written things, but I felt like I needed a place to bring it together. So it's
cool.
Understanding the whole is what is lacking often.
Cool. Whose work do you admire or are inspired by?
I'd have to say Donna Haraway. Did you read that part in the book? Did you come across Donna Haraway?
No, tell me more.
So she's a professor emerita now in science and technology studies at UC Santa Cruz. And her first groundbreaking work is a text called A Cyborg Manifesto, which was published first in 1985.
The New Citizen stuff.
Yes,
Yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah.
And the concept of the cyborg as a symbol of resistance against the traditional boundaries, gender, nature, and technology.
Yeah.
And she sort of like really brings this intersection of those three things. And she also pushes on an idea of what's called situated knowledges, which is, I guess, what I was saying earlier, where emphasizing the importance of diverse perspectives. I guess one way to think about situated knowledges is, do you think of truth as the apple or the onion? If you think of truth, if your vision of truth is the apple, you bite through an apple and then there's a core and there's your truth. But if you have a vision of truth as being an onion, you just pull out layers and layers and layers, and each layer is the situated knowledge, and there is nothing at the center. There's just layers, right? So Haraway's truth is an onion. And right, and then she gets beyond the human machine, and she also in her later work looks at animals and the human animal relationship, and has a very inclusive vision of how to think through our current moment and current climate crisis and technology. She's just brilliant. And if you listen to her talk, you're like, wow, you need like to listen to it a few times. Her diction is very high. I have a lot of admiration for Donna Haraway.
Cool. Can I ask you a stupid question, or like another stupid question, maybe I should say?
There's no such thing. Let's do it.
Okay, so there's a lot of like existential angst, I should say, right?
No, okay. Yeah.
There's like a lot of existential angst, especially in Lebanon, right? But I think everywhere, right? They see like these robots being created by like Boston mechanics or whatever they're called. And then AI is sort of every single day there's like new developments of this job is going to be wiped out, and this thing is going to be wiped out, and this thing is going to be wiped out. And then you start to like wonder, like, what is the point? I mean, is there anything for us to really do? And, are we approaching the singularity? All these different things, which makes for a lot of pessimism if you start thinking about where we are with technology. For somebody like you who thinks about technology professionally and is, as you just said, is very future focused, are you able to avoid that existential angst, or are you constantly thinking like, all right, it's ticking, the clock is ticking before the singularity?
We have a little angst, to be honest, but at the same time, I don't feel powerless, and at the same time, I see every technology has brought with it good and bad. But I do think we are in a huge revolution. Like, when I mean revolution, I don't mean like a political revolution. I mean change, transformation as on this planet in a way that we've never seen before. There's two things happening at the same time. One is called the climate crisis, and the other is this AI, which is not, whether the machine is actually thinking or not is a question. Again, I think education is the key to understanding. Procedural literacy is necessary.
Yeah.
But yes, hold on to your seats, because it's about to get wild. Everything's about to completely change. Does that mean you're going to be out of a job? I don't know. I mean, that's, I think that's a very small way of that's small in how big this change is. It's so big that everything will be different.
And that will be the least of your problems.
That will be exactly like, and I don't know that it's going to be bad. Why do we have to have this apocalyptic vision? There's some things that are going to be amazing. Like, there are going to be some medical cures. I'm sure the cure for cancer is coming soon. And there's some amazing things that we are going to be able to do that we've never been able to do, right? Along with it. So we'll need new jobs. There will be new jobs for us to do. A lot of what is true is that a lot of the automated jobs that we do, clerical jobs, will be unnecessary. People will need to think more. People will need to figure out how to live together more. And I think that that is kind of the hardest part. What I'm most concerned about is us, not the technology, because we are not good to each other.
Yeah.
And I really, it's so simple. In a way, we might need the revolution to maybe this kind of huge shift to shift how we treat each other. I don't think that sounds so lame, but I just think that this is so, like, what's changing? Language is changing. How language itself. What I'm most scared about is people becoming dumb. I'm most frightened by that. I am most frightened by the fact that, with a ChatGPT, you might not need to write a sentence, and then will we stop learning how to write sentences? I used to memorize every single phone number I ever needed up until mobile phones. My brain memorized things. I memorized streets. I memorized maps. And that was awesome. I don't need to memorize maps. I don't need to memorize streets. I don't even know what people's phone numbers are who I call every day, because it's a program now. And I'm concerned that that's going to happen to language. And I'm worried that that's going to make us even more stupid. That's my biggest concern, actually. And also, I'm also concerned about people are really in need of intimacy. We're very alienated from each other as a society more than ever. Even the societies that are more culturally bound are even there, I find alienation. And what happens is people are really craving intimacy and craving friendship, craving sociability. And, like with Snapchat, like they have that little, your own AI dude who can talk to you at any time.
Yeah.
I think that's scary, because the human being will want the affection from the machine. Yeah. And then what? And then we're no affection from each other. So that's where I'm most concerned. I'm concerned about us becoming stupid and not being able to critically think. I think critical thinking and education are key. And if we don't go down that path, then I'm a little bit worried. In terms of the technology itself changing, I'm not worried about the jobs. I think that our infrastructure, the way we do work is changing. It has been changing. It always does. It needs to change. At this point, things are very broken in many places. So I welcome that change. But I just really concerned that people are going to be very lazy. And what could also happen is, those who are really needed, who don't have, the non-privileged ones, are going to work harder. And we might find a shift in who's on top and who's in power. Because again, we as humans need to work to grow. And if we are not working at something, we don't grow. We have to exercise. We are like monkeys. We have to repeat things and do them over and over again to learn. And that's my biggest concern. But we have to figure out new ways. I'm an optimist. I'm Amel. I always find hope. Hope is necessary. I still have hope. Oh, I wanted to show you another book I got. And I was in Lebanon. I went to Nabu. Yeah. In Shikka.
North, yeah. Yeah, in the Shikka.
I got this book on hope and despair. It was there. It was an exhibit before the one I was. When I went there, there was the exhibit on Arab media. But anyhow, hope and despair is a concept that many people have written about. Yeah. But I'm on the side of hope.
Very cool. Well, Laila, thank you so much for being on the series. Anyone who's interested in finding out about you, they should go to VJ Amel. So that's VJUMAMEL.com. Laila, thanks so much. This was so fun.
Thank you, Mikey. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.